welcome to the Marine Data Clusters Controlled Vocabulary Decision Tree Development Working Session. We're really excited to have this session and really amped to have some good conversations, good discussions, and hopefully continue. This is kind of the start of a very long conversation and a very long process. So we're excited to kick it all off and see where this takes us. First off, I'd like to point everybody to the notes where you can check in, add your name, affiliation, pronouns, all of those to the Google Note sheet. And we did want to specify that by participating in this session, you agree and adhere to the ESIP community participation guidelines. And if there are any issues, please report them to the link in the session notes. The goal of this session is kind of get everybody together and get a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas down on paper and kind of just have open, fluid discussions amongst all of you experts. We're all looking at you being the experts in this field. So I'm going to start off by giving a brief introductory presentation. And hopefully everybody should see my screen all right. It looks like everything's set up. So my name is Matthew Biddle. I'm a data management analyst at NOAA's Integrated Ocean Observing System. And I'm also a co-chair for the Marine Data Cluster. Caroline is the chair, and Chris Olson is also a co-chair. And we've come together to have this working session about making a decision tree on controlled vocabularies. And so what the Marine Data Cluster is, the goal of the Marine Data Cluster is to bring together ESIP members working on data in the marine geosciences to discuss advancements and challenges in the field and to build relationships which foster future collaborations. And so we're doing this by exploring critical topics in informatics such as data management, interoperability, data analytics, data quality, cloud computing, kind of you name it. We've had that conversation with the specific focus on the marine environment. So we're trying to bring all of these conversations that are happening in ESIP and trying to bring them into a specific domain and see where we can leverage a lot of the activity that's already been done. We have calls every second Thursday at 2 p.m. So feel free to join in. We're excited and we definitely want a lot of community collaboration within this. And we do have a Twitter hashtag, which I used yesterday, and I felt very proud of myself because I'm not a Twitter person. So how did we get to wanting to host a session dedicated to deciding on controlled vocabularies? Well, this actually started in 2019. In the summer, we hosted a session at the in-person ESIP. I think it was one of the last times we had an in-person meeting. And there's a lot of conversation about interoperability and how do we get, how do we interoperate between data sets and start this communication. And so a lot of that turned into a discussion about, well, controlled vocabularies really facilitate a lot of that interoperability. And so we started thinking about, well, what are the different kind of governing bodies that exist out there for controlled vocabularies? And how can we start educating our community, the marine community at a minimum, about what the resources that exist that are out there? So in February, right after the last winter ESIP meeting, we had a 90-minute special session just dedicated to controlled vocabularies. And we had representative from the World Registry of Marine Species. We had a climate and forecast standard name representative. We had NASA's Global Change Master Directory representative. And we had the NERC Vocabulary Survey representative. And the intention was really to just give a baseline of what are the existing authoritative resources that are out there. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list of all the resources, but these were just some of the ones that we've seen communicated and talked about within the marine community. So we wanted to just get this baseline of what are the resources that exist out there and kind of go from there. And so that spurred a lot of really good discussion. And there's notes and there's a recording if you want to take a look at it. The slides are shared. They're linked into the agenda notes if you're interested. And so we went from that conversation into, okay, in March, we got practitioners into a session about discussing, well, how are they using these resources, if they're using them at all? What is the use case examples of implementing some of these things? And in some cases, they're using them wholeheartedly, and in other cases, they might not be using them and might be doing a mapping or doing some other activities. So we really got a good flavor of, okay, here's the authoritative resource that says this is our recommended practice, to this is how we're actually doing it within, repositories or within different projects within the community. So we got there was a lot of discussion, a lot of conversation about, well, okay, where do we go? How do we manage all of this information that we now have? And so what we took away is that, of course, vocabularies are pivotal for data to be fair. And controlled vocabularies really contribute to the findable, the interoperable, and the reusable part of fairness. And so you start diving into these complexities about, well, when you get into multivariate data sets, there's multiple vocabularies that might need to be used. So how do we go about implementing that? How do we go about using that within the community? And essentially, at the end of all of our conversations, there developed an idea that we just need some guidance to lay out what are the resources that are out there, and what are the pros and cons of using these resources, and maybe how do we implement them? Where do we go from here? What kind of activities can really benefit from just opening up that conversation and opening up the information that's available out there? And so one of the thoughts is to start building a guidance document. And this guidance is intended to be, community developed. We want all of you to be contributing to this and tell us about your experiences using some of these vocabularies, and maybe why you chose to use one and why you chose to use another one. So we started a GitHub repository to encourage a lot of community collaboration if there's interest. And the intention is, this is to inform and not supposed to dictate. We're not telling you what to do. We're just trying to lay the information out there, because we haven't found a good resource that has that's not the comprehensive list of all the information, and it's not just tell me what to do when I have these observations. Here's the pros and cons of using some of these things, and here's kind of our synthesized list of resources. And it's intended, since we put it on GitHub, it's intended to be flexible and change as the community changes, as we coalesce around some ideals. The documentation should change along with those. And initially, the effort is really very, very specific. We're diving into the actual observed parameter, not looking at data sets as a whole. So we're kind of skipping the multivariate part right now and just getting into how do we describe the observed phenomenon that we observed. And so the goals of today's session is to let's build a list of recommended controlled vocabularies for the marine community. And so we've attempted to do that, and I'll share that information with you in a minute. But we also want to identify and discuss, where are the points that make your decision go in a different direction, lead to a different vocabulary? What are those questions that are very strategic questions to get you to the appropriate response? And really, we're exploring a whole different way of, I've been calling it community sourcing information here. And the goal is really just to let's walk through this process and let's see how it works out. It's really, the process is what we're after. I don't think we're gonna, at the end of this session, come up with a really neat decision tree that solves everybody's problems and all of that. But we're trying to encourage a lot more community. We're trying to foster the community with deciding on controlled vocabularies. And as a reminder, the session notes, those are available. I think they're linked in the chat. And then we'll try to take the information and to synthesize it and present it on the GitHub repository. And so the process, will have 30-minute breakouts. and followed by a 40 minutes of discussion of kind of what did you experience, what did you learn, where can we go from here, and then 10 minutes of a wrap up. So the breakout rooms will fill out a questionnaire for a single parameter in a data set, and you can you can iterate over this as time as time allows. And then as you're walking through the questions, they're yes/no questions. Document any thoughts that you might have, any insights. If there's questions that we didn't ask, or if there's redundant questions that shouldn't be there, let's kind of iterate through that a little bit. And then we'll come back. Carolina wrote a really neat Jupyter notebook that processes the data from the Google form and attempts to make a decision tree. So we'll run through that and kind of see what we get, and have some discussion on that. So for the breakout rooms, so what we would like is each breakout room, we've tried to distinguish the breakout rooms based on oceanographic subdiscipline, which is the biological, geological, chemical, physical, satellite, and then we're going to have an extra other room for anything else that you want to talk about. And so the idea is get into a room and pick a specific observation from an identified data set. So write down what that observation is, and if you can, put a link to what the data set is, so we can at least have a little bit more background as to what it was that you chose. And then walk through the questionnaire in your group and answer. So the idea is you pick a data set, you are the experts, and identify what that controlled vocabulary should be. And then you walk through the yes/no questions to identify, and those yes/no questions will help us identify what are the decisions that you made to reach that controlled vocabulary that you identified there. And so the reminder here is you all are the experts in picking the controlled vocabularies. So we're trying to glean this information. This is an information gathering opportunity for us. And then have an open conversation about, why you made the decisions that you did, what things might not be there. And then again, just add to the session notes. Don't hesitate to put any of your thoughts in there. And if you, as time allows, repeat the process with any other parameter as time permits. So the survey is at this tiny URL, MDC vocab survey. I think, yeah, we'll put it in there. But just as a quick walkthrough, I believe you can still see my screen. So we're just looking for the room number, the data set, as I said, include a URL and the parameter name, just if that's available. If not, we can kind of work with hypotheticals too. And then this is our, not comprehensive by any means, but just the few vocabularies that we've picked out. And if something doesn't exist, add in other, and then type in whatever resource you think that might be the most appropriate for this. And then the rest of these questions are just yes/no questions, trying to walk through how you came to the decision as to what you came to. And I believe that is it. So at this point, we're going to split out into breakout rooms. We're going to try to just do, I think, 6 rooms. And then if there ends up being too many people, we might add additional rooms as necessary.
Yeah, and I think I've just enabled the breakout rooms. So I think people, if you select the breakout rooms at the bottom, you should be able to just assign yourself to whichever room you'd like. And I was thinking that for the sort of room 6 other room, if we wanted to leave this room open, like the main chat room as that room, then that way if anybody else joins in the session, they can at least have a landing.
Right. Gotcha. And Stace, so we're looking at attendees to pick out data sets that they have an interest in. So we don't have a list. We've walked through this process with a couple example data sets, but we're hoping that you all, with whatever background you might have, can bring in a data set and a specific observation that you could walk through this process with. Fantastic.
So I can see folks are starting to join the rooms, but if you have any trouble, do let me know and I can help by assigning people as well.
Am I still screen sharing?
I can still see your screen, Matthew, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Sean, do you have a room 1? Yes. Yeah.
Chris or Carolina, do you want to hop into the rooms just to make sure everybody's
David also.
clear?
Yeah. I guess I'll hop into physical. Oh, Steve's in there.
Yeah,
and no
so-
one's in chemistry, so that's interesting. Sure, I'll hop into Geo, I guess.
Yeah. No.
And I guess we could, Bar, was the intention to leave this room for open discussion as well?
That was my thought, because that way, if anybody like sort of joins late, there's at least a group of people here that can kind of like help direct. But
Okay. Yeah, if anybody who's left in here wants to walk through the process or has questions.
So nobody's in chem or satellite, which I think is fine, but.
Okay. Yeah, I can't see the rooms for some reason.
No?
at the bottom of the screen, when you click on the breakout rooms button, you can't see all of them.
I don't have the breakout room. I'm on the web client, so.
Okay.
Oh, there it is, breakout rooms. Oh, it's hidden.
Yeah, it looks like just most people are in either, are in bio and then geo and physical. And the only ones of us left in here are Matthew, myself, and Rebecca. So Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm an other, so
okay, great.
I'll just work through it. But I think I'm the only one usually, because mine's instrument models, which is what I presented on a couple sessions ago for the marine data set. But I think most people are bio or physical, so.
Yeah, we weren't sure about what the split up was going to be. This was kind of a last minute decision to split the rooms like this. But Rebecca, if you want to talk about anything, or if you want to discuss anything, I'm available.
I guess my only question was in your survey when you talk about data set and observation name. So I guess mine's not really, isn't really an observation, it's a model. So I was going to put instrument models, but I don't know if there's a better way to put that in here.
Oh, that's a great. So I guess in that context, I would think of it as, yeah, I don't know.
Because it's hard because it's this weird other category it's important for metadata, but it's not really as common for data sets that people take into account.
Yeah, right.
So Matthew, I know you said half an hour. Did you have like a specific clock time? Like I started a stopwatch, but we can also kind of end the breakout.
No, no, because I started a little bit late. We got into them a little bit late. So, I mean, I think I had 2:10 at 10
Okay.
after, but, you know, a little bit longer is fine. It also depends on how the breakouts are going.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I can like make I didn't set a specific timer to end the breakouts automatically, so I can do that, you know, whenever we're feeling good. But 2:10 is good. I'll have that on my clock.
Okay, fantastic. hopefully there was enough guidance to fodder some discussion and chatter about some controlled vocabularies, because as we've learned, it's a very complex landscape.
Yeah.
So thank you all for walking through. I was following the notes, and there's a lot of really good information. It sounded like a lot of really good conversations, and I'd like to explore those in a minute. But one of the things that the things that we've been trying to do is trying to collect all this information, but try to have some way to like visually understand what these decisions are, and kind of give somebody potentially a decision tree or just some kind of visual representation of this really complex landscape. And so one of the things that Carolina has done has written a Jupyter notebook that actually reads in the responses. So this spreadsheet that I'm showing right now is the responses to that survey with yes or no. And so what this Jupyter notebook does is it reads in those responses and then basically spits out a decision tree from those yes, no answers. And so what I wanted to do was actually take a look at the data that we collected during this session and kind of just see what the information looks like. And so right now I'm going to run the process, and hopefully it's going to spit out some decision tree that kind of walks through the yes or no. So we're not saying this is a solution. We're not saying this is exact or anything, but this is just kind of giving us a visual representation of if you answer yes to this question, if you answer no to this question, this is kind of the relative area that you end up. It's very ad hoc right now, but it just gives us something to kind of look at. And so the way to interpret this is a 0 on the scale is a no to the question, and a 1 is a yes to the question. And so if Darwin Core is your data model for observations, you're probably going to want to use Darwin Core terms. So this is kind of the walkthrough and the hope that we were just a way to kind of interpret the information that we're gathering. And so each time you run this, it kind of randomizes the question and it randomizes the order. So it's not the same tree you produce every single time. But what I wanted to do is at least show, what we collected from this session so far, and kind of start the discussion off from here. So, initial reactions, I guess, is what I'll go after first. Was this the appropriate way to structure this kind of a conversation on deciding on controlled vocabularies, and does this kind of a visualization seem reasonable with the information that we've been able to collect? So I'd like to open the room to anybody and everybody. To feel free to share your thoughts or opinions.
So we actually struggled a lot in room 2 to go through the questionnaire. It seemed like we need to reach out more to the community to even understand what's available and what the standards are. I'll just say that there is, even as much as we limited the scope down to like just the parameter level, it was still incredibly difficult to answer the question and find the correct controlled vocabulary. That was interesting.
Abby, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I think one really big stumbling block for the 2 data sets we went through is that we wanted to pick more than one at that very first question. It wasn't it wasn't one answer.
Oh, right. Even down at just a single parameter. Yeah, that's really interesting too.
Right, and that's the kind of guidance that we're hoping to get to, is at least say, these are your options for this one parameter, and here's the pros and cons of choosing one option versus the other. So that's a really good observation.
And, you know, so like I'll interject from the semantic harmonization cluster point of view. That's also the kind of information we want to know who should we be, which ontologies, vocabularies, thesauri should we be encouraging to cross map to each other. So if you choose one, you can also jump over to the other. You know, your data can hop over and you don't have to worry about it so much. You use the one that has the terms, but the relationship is created such that they continually try to increase their mapping. So Sweden and Envo are trying this. We tried this a little bit with NERC. It's a bit tricky, but I think that's good to know. And if we know what the marine cluster is using or needs, we can engage with them at least. Like for example, Abby, I mean, you know, like in your biological stuff with mix and Darwin core, you know, that's exactly the activity that I think you already know about it. There's a task group, an official task group between the two agencies to create a sustainable mapping. I put the link in the chat. So therefore, there's now a artifact that allows you to hop over from one to the other. So you don't have to worry too much about it. And there'll be a recommendation report coming out.
Cool. Very cool.
That's really neat.
Yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead. I want to stay on this topic a little bit and let people kind of talk about their experiences with trying to go through this process. But we did, seeing how, like time permitting, we did want to talk about that harmonization in the future and how long these issues are really gonna be a problem. Like, you know, we see this as like a transition, right? This kind of messiness, hopefully, right? Like a while ago, no one used controlled anything, right? It was just a free-for-all. And then that's changing a lot. Like people are aware of what the best practices are, but there's competing best practices. And so, you know, is the next step kind of something, Pierre, like what you're talking about, like, you know, with these semantic harmonization efforts.
I mean, I think that's what has to be, because frankly, no one wants to give up the baby, right? And also they're all slightly different. I mean, you know, NERC vocabularies are thesauri. Envo is actually an ontology that reasons over things. So it takes us a lot longer to add content to Envo than it does to a NERC vocabulary. You get more machine reasoning out, but not everybody needs that, right? So I think that's a little bit of training maybe we can provide from semantic tech to let people know what these things actually are. And then we can talk about cross-mapping them. I mean, inside the UNESCO systems, I mean, you mentioned best practices or so. We're careful to mix and match them for what where their strengths are. So NERC has great coverage because of the CVOX device catalogs, etc. So when we put them into our semantic tagging routines, here's the website. You can see on that landing page, there are 6 terminologies used, and that's a mix of ontologies like Envo and Kebi with NERC thesauri, and that does the job. So it's a question of choosing things very carefully and consciously.
Great.
Well, there's something that's purposefully not captured here and not addressed, which is the, you know, how steep of a climb is it to go from where you are into one of these vocabularies. And that's not just a simple matter of writing a program and changing names in your data set. It may be the adoption by your quote unquote customers. And we have had, Carolina and I have had some really interesting things that were very, very straightforward, even when it was easy. But the real challenge was to get the broad adoption from your customer base who's using previous versions, pre-vocabulary, and they want to stick with it and throw everything into reverse and come back. So that may be a consideration when you're considering something like, I'm looking at 2 vocabularies. One is a lot easier to onboard and much more well-known. The other one may even fit better, but I'm going to have a harder time getting the user base to get accustomed to it, and then people adjusting their software to use it.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, like when we're delivering it, if you point somebody to just the raw vocabulary, it's very daunting sometimes. It can be very complex. So in Helmholtz, what we're trying to do with our scientific teams, we help them narrow down a subset of the vocabulary they need, and they can just use that with the IRIs, or they plug it into their system. If they're already using something that is siloed or so, then it's a question of either generating a conversion table, which can take some time, or again, encouraging whatever they're using to build the interoperability layer to other resources if they don't simply duplicate. You know, if it's just busy work of mapping, maybe not needed. But if you're actually mapping to something that does something different or gives you access to another community, it may be worth it. But you know, that has to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, good comments. Any other like observations from the breakouts, like of what, you know, was guiding your decision, or whether those questions were the right questions or the right types of questions? No.
This is Jennifer. If I could contribute, I would say that a lot of the questions were good. However, what I realized with a bunch of those controlled vocabularies is that some overlapped with others. Like we were talking about how the two in the biological group for room 1, we were talking about different critters, whether that be in polychaete worms versus some eDNA samples that we could submit them to or use worms, but we could also use Darwin core. And it was sort of like being able to select more than one would have been nice, but also the fact that some of the ones on the list sort of overlapped, and because Darwin core will accept worms kind of stuff, and that's just an example. But there are quite a few control vocabularies that overlap, and being able to connect those in some way. And I think we brought this up with the CMEX data, the CMEX vocabulary in one of the previous sessions. Same thing. It overlaps with stuff that happens in Darwin core or worms or several of these other vocabularies.
Yeah, and that's exactly the kind of thing, like our end goal really is this kind of guidance document, which is a little bit more, I mean, I wouldn't say it's conversational, but it's more like this, like laying out insights about the vocabularies and how they interact. So ideally, we would want to get that kind of information into there as something people should be aware about. Like we did include a bit about the relationship between Darwin core and worms, but again, it would be nice to have the community elaborate on that, those kinds of relationships between these resources. So that's like a plug.
To jot down those notes in our discussion.
Yes.
Stacey, yeah.
I am not.
Were you able to write that down? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think we did. I think we tried to take notes to that effect.
Oh, in your room. Great. Yeah, we are going to go through those notes and really, they're not just there for posterity. Like we are going to try to go through those and take out all these bits of information and put them into some consumable form on the GitHub document in the document that's on GitHub.
Great.
Yeah, and there's room for evolution there too. This is just kind of a way we kind of tried to, do something that was bite-sized enough, or we could collect all this wisdom on just like one specific area that would be helpful, and so that could develop too. Thanks. I'm just looking at the chat. A lot of good. Yeah, and we'll have to grab the chat as well.
Yeah, one of the things that always kind of strikes me when we have these conversations is how much like little nuanced experiential knowledge exists in the community and how that is important. But like to an outsider, right? Like you don't want to go down the path of working with a vocabulary for 6 months a year, and then you realize how difficult it is to actually get the new terms that you need added. Whereas that's something that is a consideration, but like, where can that information be like more broadly broadcasted, or how, like, as someone new coming in that doesn't know anything about any of these, how do I get that information and not just like what is up on like a splash page about the program office or something?
Yeah. Yeah, and so on that note, like we did put in some categories with beyond just a laundry list. We put in some like strengths and limitations into that document. So and it was we heard the suggestion to make those like really rooted in people's actual experiences in trying to implement a vocabulary, you know, and their use case. So we do encourage to contribute your experiences. Yeah, there. We do want this to be really community, to be gathered from the community. We didn't, so it is also a little bit of an experiment. So we're going to see how it goes and try to ground this in actual use cases, which is kind of how this whole process is started. And, you know, again, maybe some of these categories maybe aren't useful and maybe they're incorrect. And those can also shift. Like even I think geo, that wasn't that, you know, that needs a little bit more refinement. Yeah. So we want to draw from all the expertise in the community to put things in terms that are generic enough, but like also really grounded in actual experience. Great.
So as you were walking through the, oh, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna kind of go a little further than what Caroline was talking about and expand on that. I see this turning, and if this is the consulting group we're building for people transitioning and from what they have into control vocabularies, because as we discussed months ago, what we want to stop is people coming up with their own names and classifications for everybody for everything that they measure, unless there is a very compelling reason to do so. And there doesn't seem to be anymore. And it looks like this questionnaire, as it grows and evolves, will become sort of an intake document for a consulting group, right? Sort of get you to think about what you're measuring, because that's one of the things in the physical group. We started thinking, oh, okay, well, we know what C-state is. And by the time we got through the questions, we were like, well, is it what we thought it was initially? And can it be as easily classified? And can we apply vocabulary to it? So it's a good sort of intake survey doc to get people on the right page. And then from there, the choices can actually be made, you know, with the actual humans in the loop, helping people to choose. Just like Chris said earlier, you don't want to go down the road and being alone and choosing a vocabulary only to find out that it has such limitations that you have to start from scratch. And I think that one of the things that Pierre was talking about was basically a partnership for sort of people on the other side of the world, since ESIP is US based, that they've all made significant progress in this area, in things that lie outside of the things that we're discussing here, but are really strongly related to it, and sort of give it, you know, nuance and color, and you know, just like Chris was saying, the subtle questions that you have to answer to make the right decision. That sort of thing is there. Does that seem reasonable? You know, that's the path that we're on, is heading toward a, you know, sort of an intake doc that gets you to classify things, think about things, and then going on to the actual process of choosing your control vocabulary.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like we said, that it is about that process, like of asking those questions and answering them for an individual, you know, data manager, or, but also, yes, aggregating kind of that, the knowledge gleaned from that process in some sort of concise, consumable document. So yeah, I think it's coming at it from both sides, as guidance from the process, and then guidance, after that guidance is grokked a little bit more. Yeah. Yeah, it's been it's an experimental process. So, we really appreciate everyone enjoying having these conversations and going through this process and maybe gleaning new insights. And I mean, I think even just from the room I was in, there was a lot to take into consideration.
Pierre, do you want to elaborate a little bit on the Serene Initiative?
I could briefly. So like in the ESIP Semantic Tech Committee, we bump into this quite a lot, not just in marine, but also other systems, a lot of semantic resources, and that includes vocabularies, thesauri, ontologies. They overlap, as we know here. And the question is, how do we federate them? So in other communities, biomedicine, et cetera, there have been efforts to try to bring people together to reduce redundancy and increase reuse of existing solutions, and also placing them along the sort of semantic ladder. So if it's the same content, but one's a vocabulary and one's an ontology, that's fine, because they do different things, as long as they map to each other. So Serene is an effort to say, hey, can we actually get something like a registry of all of these things in order, structured, kind of like the registries that are out there in the biomedical world, where you can search through all of them to see who has what and what the differences are. Can we get some guidance principles for them? Can we encourage them to collaborate a little bit more? So what was being discussed just now sounded very much like that, in the sense that this is the situation we have here. And if a ESIP cluster or group is working with these, that's exactly like a module of Serene to say that these are all used by the marine community. And that's information for us to help survey, or rather work with your surveys to say, how do you use them? What do you need them for? That will help us then design the Serene registry. Right now, it's just a GitHub repo that's fairly empty, but we're thinking about how to populate that, running from examples that already exist in other communities that have faced this challenge.
Great.
So that sounds like really great potential for collaboration there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some calls to set up for it. So it would be actually really interesting maybe to kick off with focus on the marine side of things. That'd be good fun, because it looks like you're very progressed here.
I wouldn't go that far, but
yeah.
Well, I mean, the questions are being asked, and also like we haven't started with let's build a new one, so that's already a lot better. So,
Great.
Is that part of the Semantic Harmonization cluster or the Semantic Technology cluster?
The Semantic Tech Committee. So the committee has a Serene activity, right? And the Semantic Harmonization is a cluster under the committee. It's the ESIP structuring of things. But yeah, it's just a small interest group at the moment, figuring out what to do. But this would be a great case, to drive us forward.
Great, fantastic.
A general question for everyone: as outside of what we've already discussed, are there other communities of practice like this in other science domains that people are aware of? In detail, and how did they work through this? So it couldn't be the first. That's not even possible.
Within the biomedical sciences, there's been a lot of activity like this.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the case we bring up, and it's not perfect by any means. But at least some of the technologies that they set up at the early days have helped keep things somehow structured and in order. So the Obo Foundry is the thing that's brought up. That's where things like Envo belong to. But again, what we recognized in the semantic tech community here in ESIP is that ESIP's needs are broader than that. It's not just ontologies. You need vocabularies, you need thesauri, you need different things at different levels. So we have to be a lot more inclusive than that. But the general principles of getting organized, they're quite useful, right? To say, hey, let's just encourage reuse as much as possible. Mapping between that should be a daily part of business for terminology developers so that the user doesn't have to do it at the end, right? So we're trying to encourage more of that. And I think that's what we aim in the ESIP community, sort of get inspired by some of the stuff that worked well there, but keep it more inclusive, a little bit more open, but just encourage different, some more interoperability.
it might be worth mentioning that within the semantic harmonization cluster, the work proceeded from the cryosphere area. So that's another community that's working like this. And also within ESIP, the soil community is beginning to work in controlled vocabulary sense too.
One of the questions I was trying to get at is resources. So with these other science domains working on similar, projects, you have to end up, going back to NSF or USGS or whoever, and you have to make a case for it. And knowing that other science domains have tackled similar problems before, they may have from anything from an elevator speech to sort of a mission vision that we can adopt, at least in spirit, because that's sort of the next thing is if you want people to adopt these vocabularies and use them, it's not free. And usually it's not in the funded workflow that at the outset of their grant. So it'd be good to see how people resourced a lot of these adoptions of the ontologies and vocabularies and thesauri, as Pierre said. I think Sean's a big fan of that. Not only how to do it, but how to resource it.
It is a bit. So in Helmholtz, we have actually from the metadata collaboration side, we put up money. I mean, that's really what encourages our institutes, our scientific institutes in Helmholtz to kind of up their data game. We put in a certain amount, the partnering institute has to raise the same amount to upgrade their data. And then we provide the expertise to guide that institute in enhancing its data stores. And that could be from semantics to formats to fair digital objects, etc. That seems to work. And yeah, resourcing is key here because there's a lot of goodwill. There's a lot of open source stuff. And I shared some guidance to let anyone to do it, but then time, personnel time to actually look at it, to keep it running. It's not free. And yeah, I think the more we can streamline it with common approaches, the cheaper it will become, really. And the more, and again, for the curator point of view, the more we can actually create products that they can use easily, the more likely it is that they will use them in the first place. So I think we have to identify what are the points that we can optimize to reduce the cost and labor involved with using these. Like what are they in the marine community that could help us get this to permeate more.
Yeah, that's a good point. A good question to keep at the forefront. Yeah. Yeah, beyond goodwill, what's going to foster adoption?
One thing that helps in fostering adoption is to communicate success stories along with best practices so that people see what you can get to and a little bit of the method by which you might get there.
Yeah, and yes, that's exactly the kind of thing we do want to try to capture in these use cases. These success stories. I like that framing a lot. So
I think that, yeah, go ahead, Carolina, sorry.
No, go ahead. If you had, I was going to kind of open it up for any more comments or insights and then kind of seg into next steps, which I think some of them are clear, and then maybe see if there's anything else. But first, let's open for more comments. Unless you had one. No. Okay. So yeah, we're gonna, I'm kind of excited about this idea of working with the Semantic Harmonization group, if that's something on the table. And then we will, of course, try to tease out all of the wisdom from the notes from this session, and then kind of see what needs some follow-up and how we can plan to reach out to the community and plan some more group discussions of what we find needs it. And again, thank you guys. It was very experimental and hopefully was sort of fun, maybe a little bit, I don't know, entertaining, no. You know, we've got a long, we're just getting started on the week. So, you know, thank you guys for being willing to participate and share your knowledge and wisdom. And that was really the main point of this session. And I guess I don't know if Matt wants to, do we have any logistics before we did want to end early just because, you know, yeah. I know
give people some of their time back. But I did want to remind people that we did start this GitHub repository, and that is a resource that's out there and that we'll be trying to use. So keep an eye on that and feel free to contribute and add stuff. I think linking off to this semantic harmonization, that's a great point that we can kind of connect these two efforts together. And so feel free to jump in and use that as a resource that you can write down your thoughts and opinions on as well. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for contributing. I feel like this was very successful, and it's just a very difficult conversation, and I feel like at least now we're getting the doors open and we're starting to encourage this collaboration, which is great.
Just
conversation continues on Slack. So if you're not part of it, become part of it. And at least from my end, I want to encourage people, when we pull back away from vocabularies specifically as points where the community can converge, you know, think about this in the interim for the rest of ESIP and into the future. What other sessions can we have or are good points of collaboration where we can come together and sort of consolidate information that should be disseminated in the marine data community? And we're always looking for those ideas. I think Matt and Carolina and Chris, is that true?
Absolutely.
I should have probably asked that first.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we, you know, as we look forward to winter, there's a lot of ground between here and there, and a lot in the rest of the week. If there's anything you learned here that you bring up in other sessions, you know, feed it back into the Slack channel. We'd love to hear it.